Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to today's executive meeting. First item is obviously to do that welcome and to record any apologies. I've got one apologies from Councillor Nigel Eyre today that I'll ask to be recorded, but everybody else that we're expecting is here. First item on the agenda is declarations of interest. So I'll just give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues have any additional declarations that they'd like to declare. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. It's a non-prejudicial interest, but I would like to put on the record that I am ward councillor for Heworth, which under item 9, Glen Lodge and Bell Farm are both in Heworth, and then also around the HMO licensing under item 8, I am a private landlord as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gorne.
Yeah, in relation to item 6, I don't consider it to be prejudicial, but just to note that as a director of a bid, I believe there are representations about that, but I haven't been involved in the formulation of any representations from the bid.
Thank you very much. And I can hear that Councillor Mason just said to record the same interest that Councillor de Gorne just said. And I can't see any others, so thank you very much for that, which then takes us on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So these are included in the pack on pages 1 to 14. So again, I'll give colleagues a couple of seconds in case anybody wanted to raise any issues with the minutes. If not, if I could please see those that are happy to accept those minutes. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting the minutes. Thank you very much. That then takes us through to agenda item 3, public participation. We've got 16 registered public participants today, two of whom are not yet with us, but I'll check at the time and let them join in if they do manage to arrive in time. Also, just to say that we've received a number of written representations, so I'd like to thank individuals and groups for those, and they've all been circulated around to members of the executive in advance as well. Our first public speaker is joining us via Zoom, and what we have done is that the first 5 speakers who are all joining us via Zoom are going to be going first, and then the public speakers have been able to join us. So the first public speaker is Diane Ralph, who's registered on agenda item 6, city centre access. As I know that you will know that you've got 3 minutes to talk to the executive. So hopefully you can hear me, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
We can do, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Living in York as a disabled person is like being a piece on a checkers board. Council officers and elected members are the white pieces, the ones with the power, but disabled, older and vulnerable people are the black pieces who have no power. The white pieces jump over the black pieces and take them off the board, leaving fewer and fewer of us to be seen. Here's some of the decisions you have made that take us out of the picture. You banned blue badge holders from the city centre, citing anti-terrorism advice, but there is no York risk assessment to be found, and you ignored equality and human rights law. Is that right? You then told disabled people to use Castle Car Park instead. Now you want to close it. Can that be right? You refurbished the Guildhall, but didn't include space for disabled people who cannot use their blue badge to get there. Private Eye certainly does not think that is right. You ignored the law and your own aid board policy by licensing pavement cafes, knowing that government guidance said that there should be no obstacles on the pavement. And you tell businesses that they should make adjustments for disabled people, but you as a council are not doing that. Now you want to consult businesses and the public on your pavement cafe policy and practice that, as it stands, is unlawful. Reverse the ban, and its 27 member organisations think that you should just obey the law. Tonight, you are considering a curb-free city centre, knowing there is a government moratorium on shared space schemes that have pedestrian and vehicle use. DIPTAC tells you this discriminates against blind people, people with learning difficulties and neuro disorders. So that can't be right. You have the power, but you have the responsibility to ensure your decisions are lawful, promote equality and good relationships for people with a protected characteristic. But you don't very often do this. Here are 3 of hundreds of impact statements made by disabled people about your decisions. I am deeply embarrassed that my city does not welcome disabled people and furious that the council are so dismissive of our rights. The blue badge ban prevents me taking my wheelchair-bound mother into town. In February, during Storm Dennis, it was my 94th birthday. My family booked a special lunch at the Ivy. We knew cars were not allowed, so took a taxi only to find that was not allowed, even with my blue badge. I had a long and painful walk in the wind and rain. After lunch, we had to walk to a taxi rank, but there were no taxis available. My daughter and I literally soaked through our coats and were very, very cold. That cannot be right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 6 later in the meeting. Our second public speaker today is Jane Burton, also registered on agenda item 6, City Centre access, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can do, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So to make it clear, the disabled community would like to support York businesses. We are desperate to have the opportunity to spend our money in shops and services in York, but because of blatant disability discrimination, we are still being stopped from joining in with supporting the local economy. Through my work with disabled groups in York, I have heard the most distressing stories from disabled people of all ages who have no access to the city centre. Stories of people in their 90s being drenched to the skin or exhausted from having to tackle a short walk along Coney Street. These are just the tip of the iceberg. The reasonable adjustment that previously allowed blue badge holders to park or be dropped off in streets now close to us was abandoned in June 2020 and has made it impossible for York to be inclusive. The reason the Equality Act 2010 allows a reasonable adjustment is to put disabled people on an equal footing with non-disabled people. This system worked, and the Marketing Higgett report stated that the maximum number of blue badge cars parked in the foot streets during the day was 60 cars, not hundreds. There is talk of mitigations for those blue badge holders that might be able to get into the centre from outside the foot streets. And remember that you and your officers have admitted that not all can. But where are these mitigations? Maps showing seating in the centre are updated only every 5 years. And when we checked the maps, areas that showed copious seating now have no seating. Duncan Place and Piccadilly have become a scrum situation between blue badge holders, delivery drivers, and random people chancing their luck at parking, with no sign of enforcement officers to alleviate the stress or improve the situation. Whilst we know that the Vassy bus will by no means be helpful for all disabled people, it is still no nearer fruition. Shop mobility again will not support all disabled people, and their prices have now risen to £19 a day for rental, and only one lift is functioning in the car park, and that has a severe lighting problem. Castle Car Park is set to close with the loss of 31 blue badge spaces. These policies from a council that even chose to exclude its own elected councillors from taking part in debates about blue badge parking are showing the world that the council executive do not care about disabled people, or in fact the law that protects and supports them. They also show a disregard for York's economy. York recently hit the national stage over the blue badge ban yet again, with Julian Sturdy asking a question in Parliament last week and reinforcing that with a piece in today's press. And you've also appeared in the Private Eye recently. These policies have excluded disabled residents I am doing, just one moment, residents and visitors from contributing to the economy, and has preferred the centre to be overrun with drunken stag and hen parties. You seem to lack not only good legal guidance, empathy and humanity, there is a feeling that you have lost your way morally. This is not the mark of a civilised city. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments that will be taken into account when we consider the agenda item later. Our third public speaker today is Andrew Digwood, who's also registered on agenda item 6, City Centre Access, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the York and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce recognises the good work that was done by City of York Council to support many member businesses during the pandemic, both financially and through practical measures such as the Foot Street and Pavement Cafe licensing. And it's specifically those aspects of the city centre access plan that I wish to address this evening. And that's because, having heard from some chamber members on the subject, it does seem to us that the proposed reduction by 2 hours of the Foot Street licences in York in the early evening will be highly detrimental to many businesses in the city at a time when, although there may be a sense, rightly or wrongly, that COVID-19 no longer presents a need for emergency measures, businesses, and especially those in the independent hospitality and retail sectors, are in fact facing a rolling barrage of sometimes existential challenges to their economic survival. From COVID through the staffing crisis that followed the pandemic, and now the impact of rising inflation and soaring prices for everything from raw materials to utilities, many business owners are telling us that they simply don't know what the next day might bring. And if there is any sign of economic recovery, it is a very brittle and fragile one indeed. The early evening period, 5 to 7 p.m, is of course potentially a very busy time when residents, visitors and workers in the city are out and about. And it can of course then be highly lucrative for those businesses as they're seeking to maximise revenue to offset not only the losses of the past 2 years, but also the higher costs that they're facing now. The Chamber's aware, of course, in general terms, of the dialogue that's been taking place for some time in the city between the council and those seeking improved disabled access to the centre. And while we'd certainly agree that foot streets and pavement cafes require thorough licensing and scrutiny requirements in the interests of all users of the city centre, we don't believe that these proposed changes make any sort of worthwhile impact upon the issues that those groups have been highlighting to promote better disabled access. Meanwhile, conversely, reducing foot street and pavement cafe hours by 2 hours in that crucial early evening period will have a disproportionately detrimental effect on the affected businesses during a very popular trading period. Not only will they lose out on beneficial early evening trade after 5 p.m, but they would have to begin to clear out their presence on the foot streets from much earlier, causing further disruption to their trade and pressure on their staff.
30 seconds.
In conclusion, the proposed measures feel as though they might have been seized upon as an opportunity to use some low-hanging fruit to appear to be addressing the issues raised by some groups in the city, such as those advocating for better disabled access, while in reality, they do little to address those concerns, but instead jeopardise the recovery and sustainability of a number of city centre businesses. And it's for those reasons that the York and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce oppose those proposed measures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your comments that will be taken into account later in the meeting. Our fourth public speaker today is Kate Lapham, also joining us via Zoom, registered on City Centre Access. You have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hello, I'm Kate Latham, founder of Pairings Wine Bar on Castlegate. My sister Kelly and I opened the business in 2015. I'd like to speak about the benefits we found of the pavement cafes. To begin, I would like to share a few quotes I've found on TripAdvisor. We sat outside on both occasions in the shadow of an ancient church on a lovely, quiet little side street. They offered us a nice big table outside to keep us COVID safe. It was great to be able to sit outside at a shady table on a beautiful summer's day. The outside seating on the pedestrianised street was inviting. We were pleased to be able to sit outside, enjoying the fresh air and a little hustle and bustle of Castlegate. We sat outside as the sun was shining, and this was certainly one of the highlights of our visit to York. As a thriving tourist destination, tourists visiting York expect the European cafe culture, as they would experience in any other leading European city destination. These quotes exemplify that and demonstrate our guests' enjoyment of their outdoor dining experience. On a separate note, although most of our customers are returning to a more normal post-COVID way of life, we still have a number of visitors in high-risk groups who feel safer sitting outside. My in-laws are also in this category. As a business, we have noticed changes in behaviour following COVID. We want our guests to feel as safe and comfortable as possible, and as such, we have decided to permanently reduce our capacity inside by 10%, allowing for more space between tables. This comes with a cost, but the Pavement Cafe has enabled us to recoup this cost, as well as providing a safe haven for those guests who prefer to dine outside. The current foot street hours are essential for developing the early evening economy and the European cafe culture of responsible dining and drinking. This is a culture we promote at Pairings, and the outdoor space has been vital in creating this. I do not see the benefit to York, the tourism industry in York, or the independent businesses within this city in reducing these foot street hours. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account later. Our fifth public speaker is Jacob Mayled, also registered on City Centre Access, and you have 3 minutes to talk to
Hi
us.
there.
Hello, we can hear you.
Thank you. You can hear me, okay, that's great. I'm a small business owner myself, just on Gridrum Gate, and recently I've had my outside seating area taken away with immediate effect. This happened on Monday, which is the 25th of July, which is the first week of the children's holidays, which for us is going to hopefully be our busiest period of the year. I'm very aware and understand why this has happened, because there isn't enough curb space for people to get up in between the shops, which I'm very aware of. But unfortunately, this is something that the council need to fix rather than myself, but I'm still the one that's getting fined for this, basically. Obviously, business is very hard at the moment. We all know the gas prices, everything's going up. So, and I'm competing very much with the vast amount of summer pop-ups that you guys have arranged. You've said yourself that the curbs can be fixed, but they're not willing to do so until 2023. I don't see any temporary fix being suggested, like temporary roadwork ramps that we've seen can be used. Half the street has already been affected, but the other half is perfectly fine, even though the curb situation is exactly the same. People can't get in between shops on the other side of the road, but yet they've not been affected, whereas my business has been affected. So I'm quite confused about that, which I have asked the cafe licensing team, but they just looked past that question. I've had to apply for the seating to be on the carriageway, which is all I can do, but which isn't really ideal because vehicles are still being allowed to come through the centre of town. So this can affect the customers, affect my staff having to chop and change the seating area to fit certain vehicles down. I just feel myself that there has been no thought considered on how this will affect my business, and no suggestions, no warning whatsoever. It's just an email on Monday. This is what we're doing. End of. So I'm very disappointed, to be honest, because I've spent a lot of money on making sure that the outside seating looks good and presentable, which we were hoping to get this money back through the summer period, but we'll see. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account later in the meeting. So we're now moving to speakers who are with us in the room, and the first of whom is Councillor Webb, but Councillor Douglas.
Hello, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can do, yes.
Yes, I'm coming from Zoom, actually, so I'm not with you in the room. I thought you'd have spotted me. Okay, thank you, Chair. You'll be glad to hear I'm not here to talk about access issues. I think you can get a kick in off that from everybody else. I'm here to speak about the recent Ofsted Children's Services inspection that took place earlier this year. This inspection found the service requires improvement. And tonight you were deciding on the response to Ofsted based on their findings. Overall, I don't want to dispute what is in the response, but I definitely do question why it took you so long to notice that there were issues and why it took an external inspection for you as a group of councillors to finally act for vulnerable children in the city. Officers have been doing their best, but they need leadership that is sadly lacking. In paragraph 4 of the report, it highlights that the last full safeguarding inspection of children's services in 2016 was rated good in all areas. So under your watch, children's services has got worse. After this, the report then states that there was a further inspection in November 2018, followed by a focus visit in 2019. And as a result of the focus visit in 2019, the need to improve was identified and a local improvement board was established. Yet it is clear from the most recent Ofsted inspection that nothing did improve. And in fact, since 2016, services have got worse. Was there an improvement on the focus on children's services since 2019? No. In fact, this administration took the corporate director with responsibility for children and diluted their focus by creating a new job looking at children's and adults as well. Labour told you that this was a poor choice. And whilst it might fit your corporate restructure needed to cover up your payout of the former chief exec, it did nothing for children in this city. Not surprisingly, about a year later, this post was dissolved. A year wasted. In 2019, was there an investment of new money to do new things to improve the service? No. Since 2016, there has been over £5.7 million worth of cuts to the service. In this paper, you were suggesting that there is a 4.7 million investment, but this is just covering cost inflations. And whilst it is entirely right that we honour contracts and continue paying for the services we are already paying for, this is not really an investment. It just is there to allow the council to stand still. I'm not seeing any improvements to make the lives of children better.
30 seconds.
Finally, I will leave you with a series of questions. How do you improve the consistency of written records and overall quality of assessments if there's still a turnover of staff? How many social workers are agency staff and how many are permanent for children for long term? How many social workers have actually been produced through the frontline model? And also on unregistered placements, whilst this is due to national pressures, what review was implemented at the time where we had 3 vulnerable children in unregistered placements? What was implemented by the executive to avoid this situation happening in the future? If nothing happened, why not?
Bring your comments to a close.
I certainly will.
Thank you very much.
You genuinely have to try and make a difference here, not just pay lip service to it.
You have
I
had
hope that this inspection has been the wake-up call you need. But sadly, I've not seen the evidence of that yet. Thank you for your time.
So thank you very much. I was going to say you've had well over the time, but your comments will be taken into account when we get onto the agenda item later. So our next public speaker I can see in the room, so hopefully my list is now correct, which is Councillor Taylor, who is registered to speak on matters within the executive's remit, the York Central development, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
I was worried you thought I looked like Councillor Webb for a second, Councillor Aspen. Evening, Executive. I'm here on behalf of residents in Holgate Ward, particularly those in the 1,500 homes of the Lehman Road area. When it comes to the York Central development, this executive needs to work with its partners, including the Railway Museum, to make a success of it. It is also the only body involved with the York Central partners who can claim to represent the interests of York's people. As things stand, the NRM's expansion plans remove around 4,000 residents' only direct and always available routes to and from their city centre. This is really a bad outcome. But still, minor changes to their plan, otherwise known as a compromise, could maintain 24/7 pedestrian and cycle access through the NRM. If I had £1 for every time I'd heard the council wax lyrical about its influence over the York Central partners, I'd have a small fortune. But for some reason, this influence has never shown when it comes to the museum shafting its neighbours. Over the years, as ward councillors with residents, we've been virtually on our own with this campaign, but we've never given up. The museum still haven't got their way, and we won't go away. Last week, the Labour group leader urged the museum to get back around the table with us to find a way through. This was a welcome intervention. Now, this week, can we finally see the ruling Lib Dems and Greens get off the fence and help the situation too? This is a development led by a transport museum with support from a local authority which prioritises active travel. So it's insane that it's set to deliver an avoidable net loss of access and inconvenience for thousands. Even if you don't feel as if you have the power on paper to force the NRM to change its plans, you've still got a huge platform to make representations, and they still matter. So if you do agree that one institution's unnecessary insistence on removing around 4,000 residents' only direct and always available access to their city centre is wrong, then please step up and let it be known. This would help build a consensus that representatives across York want the museum to finally work with residents to make their plans better for more people. It will also help avoid a lasting breakdown of community relations, reputational damage for the museum, which matters even more now given their involvement in our Great British Railways bid. And lastly, a potentially nightmare scenario for everyone involved of a judicial review, which is due to how planning are fumbling their way through the process, including the sham
30
surrounding
seconds.
the behind the closed doors walkway agreement. I know residents from outside even Holgate are now looking into. Finally, Leader, whether it's on access grounds, moral grounds, or even just clinically strategic grounds, we really need you as this council's leadership to do everything you can to get the museum and all of us involved in the York Central Partnership to see the bigger picture and finally bring the community with them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, which are noted and I know will be picked up outside of the meeting as we don't have an agenda item tonight. Thank you. Our 8th public speaker is Flick Williams, who is registered on item 6, city centre access. And I'll just check as well, has our 9th public speaker arrived? No. When you're ready, you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Your action plan for city centre access shows no discernible progress since the interim report back in March. It has stalled. No wonder Councillor de Goyne uses the word accelerate in the press release. Most alarmingly of all, as predicted, disabled people now face a second winter with their access blocked by temporary tank trap barriers with no drop curbs around them. Without wheelchair permeability, I and others can look forward to having to, once again, negotiate access through the barriers to the accompaniment of ableist jeering from outdoor drinkers, as was my experience last year in Lendal. Again, you exhibit incoherence by reducing pedestrian hours to 5 p.m. before raising them again to 8 p.m, a recipe for chaos and confusion that nobody wants. Just last week, the paper that went to climate scrutiny listed closure of the foot streets as a mechanism for carbon reduction. Nothing you do makes any sense at all, and I've stopped trying to make it make sense because down that route lies insanity. 11H asked officers to explore if curb-free design can be implemented in the foot streets. Answer no. There is a government moratorium on the use of shared space that shows no signs of being lifted. Blind and visually impaired people cannot navigate it, and health and safety of all pedestrians takes priority. Besides, when Labour win the next election, they will reopen the foot streets to the essential vehicles of blue badge holders. The priorities you have assigned an access consultant would not be mine, but no time to get into the weeds with that. Castlegate reopening delayed, promise broken. So cafe licensing, why are you proposing wasting more time consulting on this? The guidance is clear enough now, and I have it on good authority that owing to breaches observed in cities such as ours, civil servants indicate that current guidance will be strengthened, not relaxed. So there's that. Given your somewhat dubious record of co-production in the context of disability, disabled citizens having been once burned are now twice shy, is the goal of your consultation to find the 1 or 2 people who say the current mess is fine, works for them, so don't see a problem, rather like you did with the 2 visually impaired people asked out of context about a car-free city centre, which in your PR response turned into many people said. Well, do you know, nobody's playing that game anymore. Congratulations on uniting such a disparate group of citizens. My only response to your consultation is simply follow the law. I'll end with one of my favourite lines from acclaimed political drama, The Wire. You cannot lose if you do not play.
Thank you very much. Your comments will be noted when we consider agenda item 6 later in the meeting. Our ninth public speaker is not being able to be here, so I'll move straight on to our 10th public speaker, Andrew Lowson, also registered to speak on city centre access. And when you're ready, you've got 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you, Chair. My focus tonight is primarily on the recommendations to revert the Foot Street hours back to 5 p.m. You have noted from my letter to the exec on the 8th of July that a move back to 5 p.m. will be viewed by both businesses and a lot of the public as a backward step out of kilter with the government's plan for decarbonising transport and also many of CUIC's own strategies. Tonight and through written correspondence, you should have heard about the benefits of the early evening economy to business trading. I must also emphasise to you that the detrimental impact of traffic being let back into the city centre at 5 p.m, especially since post-COVID, we've seen a marked increase in food deliveries using motorised vehicles. Looking at the city centre access update included in tonight's papers, my overarching comment is the council paper appears to be confusing the issue of access rights with a separate issue of foot street hours and pavement cafes. Following a conversation with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, I understand the officer report tonight is out of date on one matter and inaccurate on another. So on the matter of pavement cafe licences, the report highlights the flexibility on cafe licences granted by the Business and Planning Act 2020 ends in September of this year. As of last week, government have now extended this to September 2023. So I want to ensure that it's clear round the table that paragraphs 3, 4, 10, 38, 55, 87, and also recommendation H1 in the access report, I would say, is now out of date or context. On the matter of the foot streets, paragraph 53 of the report highlights that another temporary traffic order to extend the foot streets cannot be granted by the Secretary of State. Again, having spoken to government, this is corrective specifically related to pavement cafes. However, having read the government advice on TROs from last year, a temporary traffic order can be granted if there is valid traffic or safety reasons. For example, promoting active travel or making space for more pedestrians. Also in this guidance, it gives the option of an experimental TRO, which I understand other local authorities are using to gather further evidence in support of a permanent TRO. So I want to be clear that I believe the exec do have the ability to extend the TRO on a temporary basis and in line with the updated Business and Planning Act. I suppose my challenge to you tonight is, do you really have the inclination to do that and to continue to support the early evening economy and the businesses that also rely on it? Speaking to access campaigners in the past few weeks, they do not believe that reducing foot street hours to 5 p.m. is a progressive move. We agreed that the bid could become more involved in understanding which individual pavement cafe licenses do not meet the criteria of relevant legislation, and that is something I want to say to everybody I'm committed to. However, the issue of access to the city centre by blue badge holders needs to be looked at on its own merits and in line with the Martin Higgett report that was commissioned by CYC in 21. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider that agenda item. Our next public speaker today is John Pybus, who's also registered on item 6, city centre access. And again, when you're ready, you've got 3 minutes to talk to us.
Hello there, and thank you for your time this evening. I'm John Pybus from the Bluebell on Fossgate, and there's just a fair few things I'd like to say about the foot street hours and reducing them back to 5 p.m. One of the first things is that a lot of my customers are local people and they are older people, and they still do not feel safe drinking inside the pub, especially a small pub like mine. And you have to remember that an awful lot of the local pubs in York are the small ones. The big pubs with big air conditioning are generally national chains. And this fear of drinking inside is going to continue for the rest of their lives. Now, the external seating that we have outside the Bluebell it's not even replacing the trade that we've lost inside. We're not making any extra money about it, and it's not about trying to price gouge and to make as much money as we can. To take away the external seating would threaten the business's viability. Stopping the foot streets at 5 p.m. is fine for cafes, but it does discriminate against pubs. Drinkers not being able to drink outside later than 5 p.m. is no use for pubs needing to take advantage of the good weather. Now, the license used to go till 8 p.m. So you're reducing it to 5 p.m. We're losing over 1,000 hours of external sales per year. And if I just sold £10 worth of beer for that 1,000 hours, I can recoup the amount of money that I am losing from customers not wanting to come inside. I can keep the Bluebell open. We can continue. And this is not a zero-sum game. It feels like in the media an awful lot of the time it's hospitality being pitted against disability groups and vice versa. But the Bluebell can't accommodate wheelchairs inside because we're so small. We can accommodate wheelchairs in our external seating area. It's not a zero-sum game. Everybody can win. The City of York Council spent £1.1 million on resurfacing Fossgate with the express aim of creating cafe pavement licenses, and I was deeply involved in those discussions. We were promised them, they didn't materialise, and we had to wait for COVID to hit and the coronavirus regulations to actually get the external seating. There's also been a lot of media interest in the infrastructure of the city recently, but the infrastructure of York is 1,000 years old. You're not going to be able to change the infrastructure for the better, even though you have promised drop curbs and that sort of thing, which still haven't materialised. And the fact that York has a unique infrastructure is why people come to visit York. If you're going to do this properly, you're going to have to go street by street, talk to the local business owners in person, talk to the residents, and actually find out what's best for that particular street. And lastly, where has sympathy for hospitality gone? And I've got 30 seconds. None of us will ever recover from COVID. It's not just lost sales, but it's lost time as well. We bought leases for fixed amount of times and 2 years of that has been lost. I personally have lost 2 years at the absolute prime of my career, and I'm going to have to tag that on to the end of my career. We are open at Christmas, but we lost sales because the government said that people shouldn't be going into pubs. Everything is going up inflationary wise. We've lost 50% of the United Kingdom's pubs in the last 20 years, just during my career, and only 37% of them are now profitable. Please don't take away the one lifeline that we have left, and let us continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account later in the meeting. Our next public speaker is Adam Wardale, also registered on item 6, City Centre access. And again, you've got 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair of the Hospitality Association in York, I am here to represent the many hospitality businesses in the city, but also the wider businesses as we work very closely with Indie York and the York High Street Forum, who share the same views as a collective voice for the business community in the city. The benefits of extended foot street hours on the early evening economy and trade have been huge. Whilst I appreciate that the COVID challenges that these measures were put in place for have gone, there are still challenges for businesses, which, as we all know, are going to get worse over the coming months, whether that's food or utility costs. The costs of running a business have dramatically increased, and the increased foot street hours and pavement cafe culture has given many businesses across the city an additional stream of income, whether this be an increase in covers or an increase in their opening times to benefit from the foot street hours. This has had a knock-on effect to increased employment, with businesses covering the additional opening hours. Reverting the foot street hours will impact many businesses in the city, as they will be forced to start dismantling their pavement seating from 4:30. Now is not the time to be reducing businesses' ability to trade. York also continues to try and promote itself as a family-friendly city, as is noted in the My City Centre vision that the executive approved. The early evening economy is key, especially for this family audience, who will seek places to eat and drink during that 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Reverting to 5 p.m. will have a detrimental impact on traffic in the city centre, which may put many families off visiting the city during this time due to safety concerns, as areas like Blake Street, amongst others, will become overrun with takeaway delivery drivers. I appreciate that there are access concerns that have been raised, but I don't see how 2 hours solves this problem. I would ask that the executive look to keep the extension of the foot street hours to 7 p.m. in line with the pavement cafe measures, which have been extended to September 2023 by the government, and instead use this time to ensure that we can continue to adapt to the European cafe culture that everyone has come to expect. And during this time, improve the access issues through dropped curbs and working with businesses where the pavement cafes have caused specific issues. As a York Bid Board Director and member of the Tourism Advisory Board, as I would also like to state that I back the letters that have been sent into the executive, as these bodies are also keen to keep the foot street hours at 7 p.m. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account later in the meeting. Our next public speaker is Daniel Smith, who's registered on agenda item 7, Hackney Carriage licenses, and you've got 3 minutes to talk to us.
Mike's already on. Yeah, I ain't got a big speech to say. It's more on what's happened over COVID. We've lost 25-30% of drivers. You've done a survey of the trade in September, straight after COVID, deemed that we need more plates on the roads. So now you're saying 9 more plates. I'm doing 75% of my trade, but I'm doing 20 hours more work than I was before COVID. Do you want us to work 7 days a week? There's no need for 9 more plates. Where are you going to park them? You've shut all those taxi ranks. We've got Saviourgate at Minster Rank, Duncan Place. Duncan Place is overrun with, as other people have said, overrun with takeaway drivers. We ring parking can't bother to come and sort it out. We can't even get on the rank. And that's 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Then you go on that we need more wheelchair accessible plates. It's the private hire sector that need more private hire plates. My mum's in a wheelchair. She rings up for a private hire tool because the people in wheelchairs tend to organise the days out. They want to know when they're getting picked up, how they're getting home. You can't do that with a Hackney. A Hackney plate, you flag down. You don't book them. Private hires, you try to ring up for a private hire for a wheelchair accessible, you can't get one. But now you're saying 9 more plates for wheelchair accessible to try to bypass the fact that there's no work for us. I've got photos on my phone today of 14 taxis on Saviourgate parked there. We're all chatting. There's no work for us. And now you're deeming to punish us by putting 9 more plates onto ranks where I just don't understand where you're going to put them, where you're going to park them and where you're going to rank them. You keep shutting us down. Piccadilly, you shut that rank down. You put bicycle racks on it. We can't use that anymore. It's just getting ridiculous. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll consider when we get to agenda item 7. Our next public speaker is Andy Simpson, who is registered to speak on agenda item 8, additional licensing in York and the consultation results that has happened. And you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Yes, so I'm Andy Simpson, representing York Residential Landlords Association on the subject of additional licensing. Obviously, as per previous correspondence with councillors, this has been addressed, assessed by landlord regulation specialist David Smith and latterly housing barrister Justine Bates. In summary, there were 2 consultations because the first was unlawful, and that remains to be the case with the second consultation. We're advised that the council has access to all the necessary information and has the necessary powers to control housing standards in York, but isn't using them effectively. Renters Reform Bill, we would question the need for a scheme in light of the recent A Fairer Rented Sector policy paper feeding into the Renters Reform Bill. This proposes a property portal and landlord register controlling all aspects of property management, which is a duplication of what is being proposed. And we believe the direction of travel is away from local licensing schemes, and we're expecting reform in this area. We're advised that the evidence base is very weak, particularly in Heworth, Hull Road and Oswaldwick and Derwent wards, and open to legal challenge, and that is the intention. This won't be self-funding. These schemes look lucrative for local authorities, but no licensing scheme has been self-funding. So you're essentially asking York residents to part-fund this scheme through council tax. The lack of detail in the figures gives no confidence on returning those funds, and there's no legal costs for judicial review in the setup fees. Our preference is for a proven accreditation scheme run by a recognised body such as Unipol. There are clear reasons why the council scheme wasn't successful in comparison to a recognised scheme, and our understanding is that the universities have funded research into this within the last 3 to 4 months. Licensing is equally self-selecting of good landlords. Obviously, there's an acknowledgement in the documentation that rents could increase as a direct result of licensing, and obviously this is not a good message during a cost of living crisis. The proposals are targeting student areas, and in terms of the survey results, there's a heavy use of arbitrary percentages in the document on a very small sample size.
30 seconds.
Only 1,032 responses across 2 consultations, and that's likely to be predominantly landlords and agents, and a very small student percentage, given the fact there's around 25,000 students living in York. So you can't make an informed decision on a multi-million-pound proposal that is essentially loss-making with such a small statistical sample size. But overall, we agree with the proposal of a steering committee for housing involving key stakeholders. A collaborative approach to housing has worked in other areas of the country. The Leeds rental standard is a good model in terms of partnerships, and we believe that the conflict that exists between landlords, agents and the council is something that's been in place for a number of years and needs to be addressed going forwards.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider that agenda item later. Our next public speaker is Councillor Pavlovic, who's also registered on agenda item 8, additional licensing in York, and you have 3 minutes, as you'll know.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the officers who have spent many months working on this and have produced a comprehensive and, in my opinion, compelling argument why executives should support the recommendation to adopt additional licensing for HMOs. By doing so, you will be joining over 50 other councils, large and small, around the country, who have also introduced selective licensing to run alongside mandatory licensing imposed by government. As an elected member with the largest concentration of HMOs in my ward, Hull Road residents, tenants and non-tenants alike, have long been concerned about not just the numbers, but also the conditions and standards in HMOs. I've been contacted by tenants with non-working showers and toilets, electrics hanging loose, windows not repaired, damp and mould and unresponsive landlords. Non-residents complain about noise issues being ignored, rubbish allowed to pile up and gardens allowed to grow wild. Councillors can and do raise these matters with agents and through housing standards. But as the report states, additional licensing will significantly assist the council to deal with the problems identified associated with poor management of HMOs. It cannot have come as a surprise that only 15% of tenants and 18% of non-tenants thought landlords maintain their properties to a good standard. I recall visiting the HMO of current councillors when they were students, when the toilet wouldn't flush properly. While this might be seen as a rite of passage when a student, when you're in a position to ensure that your successors don't have to experience what you did, the responsibility is evident. Of course, the landlords don't want to be further regulated. When did they ever? But you need to hold firm and not succumb to threats of legal action. It's what the people expect from their elected members, not to be cowed by vested interests, but to do what is right for their electorate and for the city. It's a shame that the good landlords who do maintain their properties well and are responsive to issues raised by tenants and neighbours are going to have to register in order that, shall we say, the less good landlords can be held to account, but we should not and cannot differentiate between them. I therefore urge you to accept the recommendation and introduced a licensing regime that was accepted by full council as long ago as 2017 when I first proposed it.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 8. And I'm just checking as to whether so our final public speaker has not arrived. So I'd just like to thank all the public participants, those in the room and those joining us on Zoom for their comments today. That then means that we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the forward plan on pages 15 and 16. I'll give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues want to raise any issues, and if I could see if those are prepared to accept the forward plan. So that's a few nods and hands. So it's clear consensus in favour of accepting the forward plan. Thank you very much. Which then takes us straight on to agenda item 5, Catchment Flood Management Project. And this starts on page 17 of the packs. And I'm going to hand over to James to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So flooding is something that York lives with and manages on an almost annual basis. So whilst we're quite adept at managing and dealing with flooding solutions that lie within our geography, much of the solutions lie outside our geographic boundary upstream. So I want to introduce you to Phil Delaney, who will take you through an exciting project that York has developed with DEFRA and the Environment Agency, and that's aimed at developing natural flood risk management opportunities across a much bigger geography just in the city.
Good evening, councillors. The report that we've drafted provides details about the proposed catchment flood management project. And this is being granted central government funding to promote a long-term approach to managing flood risk in York. The project is part of a national programme of projects which aim to use innovative methods to increase flood resilience locally, while also informing national government policy. The long-term approach taken by the project complements recent investments to raise flood defences throughout the city of York. And as James mentioned, the project takes a natural flood management approach, which aims to slow the flow of water across the catchment to reduce flood risk downstream. This is widely acknowledged as a good thing to do, but can be difficult in practice. There's often difficulties in understanding the cause and effect between changes in the catchment and flood risk downstream. And there's often different perspectives on how water should be managed within the catchment. The project's been designed to address these challenges with the aim of creating an ongoing legacy for the whole of the catchment. In June 2021, the executive approved the development of the business case, which is needed to access the funding. This business case was developed in close consultation with a wide range of project partners, as set out in paragraph 11 of the report. And it was submitted in April this year. That business case has now been approved by the Environment Agency on behalf of DEFRA, the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So to enable the project to proceed, the executive is asked to approve the implementation of the project as per paragraph 6 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll open this item for any comments or questions. Go to Councillor Widdowson.
Phil, many thanks for the report. It highlights the great work you and Steve Ragg and your colleagues across the region have done through collaborative working. The City of York Council and the Environment Agency have worked together as a team to deliver a significant number of projects within our city. The £110 million worth of the flood alleviation projects will better protect 3,000 properties in York, and they're nearly complete. However, as you've said, and as we all know, the climate's changing. And in order to carry on this good work, we need to move the focus upstream and look at nature-based solutions with our neighbours. This catchment project does just that, and I'm delighted to support the recommendations to implement the £6 million catchment flood management projects, which is fully funded by central government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just checking in case any other. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Phil, for the report, and I'd like to agree with Councillor Widdowson. I think that this is an excellent project and much needed. We need management of water upstream, and we've been waiting a long time for it in effect, haven't we? I think we all know that. And it will help to protect thousands of York residents from flood risk, which is going to become more and more important as time moves forward. So the Labour group is fully in support of this.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on page 18. If I could please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations. That's a clear consensus. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. That then moves us on to agenda item 6, City Centre Access Action Plan Update. And this starts at page 25 and runs through to page 62. And again, I'm going to go to James to present this to us.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So you've heard from public speakers tonight about the impact of no blue badge holder vehicle access to the pedestrianised streets. And this was a difficult decision made by Executive in November last year. This was in direct response to the police counter-terrorism advice. And there is a risk assessment. And indeed, on the back of the additional recommendations that you made in November, we've arranged for Executive to receive a briefing from MI5. That was understandably in private, given the contents of that risk assessment, but you have been assured that that risk exists. That decision very carefully considered the equalities and human rights impacts and actually received specific legal advice when you made that decision. The meeting in November also agreed that blue badge parking would return to Castlegate after the end of September 22. There is an error in Annex D, which is the leaflet which we've circulated, which suggests that that won't return until later than September. I think it says November. That is an error in that. The record of the meeting is very clear, so it's not a promise broken, it's just an error in that Annex D. You've also heard a public speaker state that hostile vehicle mitigations are only to achieve modal shift, That's not the case. The hostile vehicle mitigations are being developed in response to that police advice. And that is also advice that was given in public to these meetings. What that report to scrutiny did say was that hostile vehicle mitigations are by their nature a way of enforcing city centre policy. So the decision to remove exemptions for some delivery vehicles is a decision made that defines the city centre policy. It will be a policy that is much easier to enforce once the hostile vehicle mitigations are installed and support and promote the delivery hub trial. But the reason for the HCM decision was based upon that counter-terrorism advice. As part of the decision in November, you adopted a strategic review of city centre access, which included an action plan to improve access to the foot streets, which ranged from additional blue badge parking to drop curbs and an access officer. The report includes an annex, which is an update on the delivery of that action plan. Executive are asked to note the update and the planned commissioning of an access specialist consultant to accelerate the programme following the unsuccessful attempt to appoint an access officer. The report details the streets in Para 31 to be targeted for drop curbs. I can confirm these will be delivered some this autumn and some the other side of the Christmas markets in spring next year, building on the additional crossing points delivered within Stonegate. Annex B is a report which actually went to Councillor Gullen's decision session when you allocated extra funding to dropped curbs because the original funding source from central government didn't come through. And that talks about the challenges of sellers and hidden services and how it's not always easy to install drop curbs in a historic city. What the report also seeks is a decision to use CYC funds to accelerate the feasibility works of a city centre bus shuttle, as the government funding is still awaited. You've heard from the speaker about the concern for shared spaces or a curbless design. The report only proposes a study to explore the feasibility of a curbless design in our foot streets, and that's because there's been a reduction in vehicles in pedestrianised times. The government guidance, which there's a link to in para 52 of the report, states that shared space with curbless designs should be avoided in areas with large amounts of vehicle movements. As I've just alluded to, I don't think the foot streets currently meet that criteria, but we want to explore this in detail. A curbless design or shared space is obviously a much more costly intervention and would need to be considered as a long-term ambition and subject to significant external funding. The report recognises that the current pavement cafe licences in the city were implemented under emergency legislation, This was initially in response to COVID, the requirement for social distancing and in support of immediate economic recovery and the context Eat Out to Help Out scheme. The emergency legislation removed the requirement for planning permission. Since the report was written, and as one of your speakers noted, the emergency temporary legislation has been extended again to September 2023. You have heard the challenge that we've not followed the government guidance. The legal advice we have received indicates that we believe we had followed the government guidance. The government guidance is changing all the time. Just earlier this week, the guidance was clarified regarding the ability of the council to extend the licences. So I need to modify recommendation J. And the word in which you've got in front of you, but I'll repeat for those watching, is that recommendation J should now read, approve the principle of renewing existing pavement cafes for 3 months free of charge, but restricted to Foot Street hours. Note that Foot Street hours will revert to their normal 5 p.m. in October 22, but be temporarily extended to 8 p.m. in November for the Christmas market to the end of December 22. And the reason for recommendation J doesn't change. Whilst the permanent approach to pavement cafes is laid out in the draft Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, it still has some way to go before it becomes law. I still believe there is a lack of clarity about the government regulatory framework for pavement cafes in the long term. As our city has returned to normal post-COVID operation and a return to the busy, thriving city, the lived experience and impact that emergency pavement cafes has on specific access issues has become more apparent, and you've heard about some of those tonight. Whilst it's likely pavement cafes are here to stay in some form, pavement cafes are no longer part of an emergency response. Therefore, a review of the guidance on conditions on when cafes are acceptable is proposed, recognising the impact they have on access, as you've heard. The existing historic infrastructure in the city centre is not ready to accommodate pavement cafes in every location, especially on the pavement, without some impact on access, without additional appropriate mitigations. The report recommends that the access consultant works with both disabled advocacy groups and businesses to review the conditions and guidance of when pavement cafes are acceptable and what can be done to improve access when they are in place. Recognising the challenging environment for business, the report recommends that the current licences are extended, and as I say, we'll need to go through an application process given the change this week from government, and they're extended through to the end of the year whilst officers work with both disabled advocacy groups, businesses and the access consultant to develop new guidance and test and explore options during this extension to mitigate the impact of pavement cafes. This new guidance conditions will then be applied as a condition when businesses apply in the new year for a new pavement cafe licence. Contrary to what one of the public speakers said, temporary ramps are proposed as part of that solution, and a picture of those are contained within Annex C. They are actually a solution that Westminster have produced because they are experiencing the same challenge. It's not going to be possible to meet every need, but the consultation is designed to maximise the benefit of any changes made. That's why we're proposing consultation. The council has a long-term 10-year vision for the city centre. It is detailed in the My City Centre vision and sets out a number of ambitions for the future of the city centre, including creating family-friendly midweek early evening economy, spreading events across the city centre and encouraging the outdoor cafe culture that has emerged during the pandemic. A change to 7 p.m. does facilitate that. Many of the pavement cafes can only safely operate during pedestrianised hours. The final part of the report therefore considers if the council should undertake the statutory consultation now on a permanent change to 7 p.m. for pedestrianised hours of the foot streets, recognising the impact of reversion to the normal 5 p.m. will have on businesses and particularly pavement cafes, as you've heard from the public speakers tonight. The temporary traffic regulation order that extended Foot Street hours was made in response to COVID. A temporary traffic regulation order can only be made by the council for 18 months. The advice received from the Department for Transport on this matter was that a temporary traffic regulation order could be extended with the permission of the Secretary of State, but only if the council was doing the statutory consultation on a permanent change. Therefore, in considering whether to undertake the statutory consultation now, you need to consider whether the other things we are doing could influence the outcome of that consultation. And having considered that, The proposed review and implementation of new conditions of when pavement cafe licences may be granted may impact upon that 7 p.m. consultation. And the uncertainty over the long-term pavement cafe licence regulatory framework, given that a permanent solution legally is still not in place. And the fact that the government guidance keeps changing. Given that uncertainty, we've reached the conclusion that now is not the time to do the statutory consultation on a permanent change to 7 p.m. and are proposing that that doesn't take place until the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has passed through Parliament, and then consider in light of the progress in delivering the city centre access action plan at that point in time. However, executive also need to make their own decisions, but that's the balance of the recommendation that officers have come to. Should executive accept the recommendation to defer any statutory consultation on 7 p.m, it means core Foot Street hours will revert to 5 p.m, as per the temporary traffic regulation order developed in response to COVID, which expires at the end of September. As normal, there'll be a later finish for the Christmas market. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Open the item up for questions and comments. Go to Councillor Mason first.
Thank you, Chair. During the early stages of the pandemic, the ability to swiftly award cafe pavement licences without a planning application enabled many businesses to continue trading during what was an incredibly challenging time. We've heard firsthand today just how important that has been to businesses. We remain committed to the long-term vision of the city centre with outdoor cafe culture playing a big part in the success of our economy. But the current city centre infrastructure is not yet ready for this vision to become a long-term reality without some further works. Whilst the pandemic and the emergency measures under which the city and businesses operated might be over, this is not to say that businesses do not face significant challenges now. They clearly do, whether that be the supply chain issues or rising bills. However, as we leave the pandemic and look forward to the future, we have to take account of what has been working and what hasn't during these exceptional times. It's very clear that there has been access issues caused by pavement cafes, particularly those blocking the footways. Again, we've heard some of this today from our speakers. So it's crucial that we revisit the long-term local guidance that would address these access challenges and that pavement cafes present to residents. We recognise that there is not one single solution that would fix all, so it's important that we test thoroughly and look at all the options that would work both for businesses and for residents. It will therefore be crucial to hear the views of both on ideas from business, which currently have licences, as well as disabled residents who know best the day-to-day issues and their current circumstances and the issues they face. I'm happy to see the work to be proposed to be led by the access consultant, whose professional insight will be important in this work. Regarding the comments made by public speakers on the Foot Street operation hours, I absolutely appreciate these concerns. As public speakers have rightly noted, 7 p.m. is not just about pavement cafes, it's very much about supporting a thriving and family-focused evening economy. But clearly the operating hours of the Foot Streets are directly linked to the operation of cafe licences, which are the most obvious beneficiary of extended operating times. We remain committed to those ideas and the long-term vision of the My City Centre piece that also includes reference to encouraging an outdoor cafe culture. However, in order to do that, this is in the long term, and to make sure it works for the benefit of both businesses and residents, we need to do this in the right order. To carry out this statutory consultation now without even understanding how many cafe licences there will be in the city centre would potentially set the difficult needs of businesses against access. There is something we absolutely do not want to, that's absolutely something we do not absolutely want to do. I need to work together to understand the best long-term solution for long-term solution that accommodates all needs. I think that's pretty much big enough, wouldn't you? The lack of long-term legislative clarity, getting the guidance right, as well as those needs to deliver more for access improvements we're committed to, and this means that it would not be the right time to make a permanent decision. As the officer recommendation concludes, to consult on the permanent change of Foot Street hours would not be appropriate and cannot be based upon facts. I do, however, have some concerns over waiting for the shambolic government to provide clarity. Therefore, I'd suggest that a review on how the new guidance is operating is carried out next summer, so we can be in a position to decide on the permanent Foot Street operating hours as soon as possible. So, Chair, on recommendation I would like to suggest adding the following to the condition. Until executive have had an opportunity to consider the lived experience of pavement cafes under the new guidance, there is more clarity about the long-term legislative framework, and progress has been made in delivering the city centre action plan, city centre access action plan. Recommendation I would then read, therefore the recommendation to postpone any decision to undertake the statutory traffic regulation order consultation on a permanent change to Foot Street hours is 7 p.m. until the executive have chosen to consider experience of cafe licenses, basically everything I just said 2 minutes ago. There's more work to be done to support the creation of a safe, thriving and accessible city centre, which we must get on with for the benefit of businesses and residents and visitors alike. With this inclusion of the extra wording in recommendation I'm happy to support that recommendation. Thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to James first and then bring Jenny in, just on the two suggested amendments. So obviously there's the one from James, which you've already explained to us, and another one from Councillor Mason. Whether you've got any comments on that, James, and then I'll just check with Jenny for clarification.
No, I think that's fine if that's the recommendation you want.
Chair, I can confirm that I have been consulted on the proposed amended wording to the two recommendations. Just for the sake of clarity, I think it may be prudent for me just to read Councillor Mason has indicated to us. The amended wording that I have is, therefore, the recommendation is to postpone any decision to undertake statutory traffic regulation order consultation on a permanent change in Foot Street hours to 7 p.m. until the executive have had the opportunity to consider the lived experience of the pavement cafes under the new guidance, and until there is more clarity about the long-term legislative framework and progress has been made in delivering the city centre access action plan. That is the revised wording that I've received, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So obviously at the end, we'll consider the recommendations, and there's two amendments to the recommendations at the same time. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, first of all. The numerous speakers that we had from the disability community and also from business, it is very clear that nobody thinks that we should be going to 5 p.m. I don't see it of benefit to any of those communities for a start. And at this point in time, I'm really quite confused, and there may be other people in the room who are as well. Quite how do the existing cafe licenses that are currently to 7 p.m. and run until January, how are they going to be run in alongside a reduction in the Foot Street hours to 5 p.m? I have a vision of absolute chaos, to be honest. I just would like you to tell me how this is going to work for a start, and then I'd like to come back.
So the existing pavement cafes all expire at the end of September. So what we're proposing, they will need new pavement cafe licenses. We're proposing they're free of charge during this consultation period till January, but they will be restricted to what Foot Street hours are. So if the decision is taken to revert back to the normal 5 p.m, then the pavement cafes in the main will revert to 5 p.m. as well under those under that 3-month period. There will be a few pavement cafes who potentially can operate beyond 5 p.m. So, for instance, some of those that are in the wide expanse of Parliament Street potentially can still operate until 7 p.m, but it'll need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you. Yeah, I just feel as though this whole approach is not really reaching or solving the problems for any of the interested parties, the disabled community and the business community that we are trying to really address. We've heard about the impacts it's going to have on everybody, and I totally agree with what Andrew Lowson said about the fact that we are confusing access rights and pavement cafe licenses and the issues that that has caused. The two, and also foot street hours. They're all interrelated, of course, but on another level, they are separate issues that need looking at in a separate forum, I believe, in order to find an outcome that does not pit the business community against the disabled community. And try as hard as we might, we have heard tonight that there's really quite strong views on this. So I just don't feel that that 5 p.m. Move is a good one. Nobody appears to really want it. And I think we need to find a way to make 7 p.m. work and then find access for people who need it, that have blue badges, so that they can access the city centre at that point. And I cannot see quite why this isn't achievable in some parts of the city, not in all, but in some parts. And that's what the disabled community are asking for. So yeah, I just can't, I can't support this report, I'm afraid.
Thank you. James.
I think because there's a statutory consultation element to changing a traffic regulation order, I don't think anyone disagrees with the suggestion that we need to work with both disabled people and businesses in finding a solution. I think the question is the order in which you do it. That's in effect what the report is looking at, is the order in which you do that work. And I think what the report proposes is that you try to resolve those issues before you make any permanent change that has further impact. If the impact continues and then we're trying to fix it, in my view, you're doing it in the wrong order, and that's the conclusion I came to. But obviously, it's for executive to decide if that's the right recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Duggan.
Yes, it was just a specific one point I wanted to a question really to the officers. One of the speakers we had particularly focused on Fossgate, which I believe is a separate regulation from the foot streets. So I just wanted to clarify, obviously the concern was raised there about impact on the decision we're making tonight in relation to Fossgate, which I believe has a separate regulation covering, allowing it to be a pedestrian cycle priority between 10:30 and 8. And that is, as I understand it, it's not affected by the decision we're making tonight in relation to the terminal hours of the foot streets.
No, that's correct. And I think on Fossgate, we need to work through the, there are access issues on Fossgate. I think it's fair to say the lived experience has very much sort of flagged that. But yes, absolutely, we will need to work through, when we work through the rest of the city, we'll need to work through those issues on Fossgate at the same time.
Councillor Smalley.
It's not a supplementary to this question in case there's something. No? Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry, I know you've spoken a lot this evening already, James, but it's just whether you could speak a little more about the challenges that the council have already had in delivering dropped curbs, the challenges that are in fact raised in paragraph 28 and Annex B.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we already had work on Stonegate planned, and we, on the back of the decisions executive have made, basically went back to the drawing board and tried to deliver as many dropped curbs in that scheme as we possibly could. And we thought, perhaps naively, that would be relatively easy to achieve. but there are a number of constraints, and at each location you can hit all three in some cases, or one or two of them. The key constraints are that you get underground structures, and on Stonegate that was quite often cellars. So you've actually got a private slab of concrete, just a few, millimeters in some cases below the paving slabs. You also have utilities in those pavements. Now, some of those utilities are easier to move than others. And what you also have, and this is slightly more technical, so it might be easier to refer to Annex B, but you have a relatively narrow footway with a defined road edge and a defined back line where it meets the property, a step or something, and actually putting a dropped curb in them would contravene your slopes in the about access. So you might put a drop curb in but create a non-compliant pavement because the slope is such that it's not appropriate. So those three are all part of the challenges that we face when we try to put in drop curbs. As I say, Annex B sets out the process of how we propose to do that and the lessons learned from Stonegate, how we propose to do that when we do Blake Street, Lendal and Low Petergate, I think it is next year.
Thank you. Councillor Duggan, I'll come to you next.
Yes, I did have a broader contribution to make. Certainly welcome the progress that's been made in delivering some of the access improvements identified in our November report, but it is, as has been said, important that we can do whatever we can to accelerate that work. So I'm glad to see specific actions and recommendations in the report. It's also been noted that the position around an access officer, but whilst it's disappointing we're not able to recruit someone to that position, we do have a proposal to commission access consultants to lead on the delivery of these priority actions as set out in paragraph 26. I also like to welcome recommendation to bring forward the city centre shuttle bus feasibility study, and recognising that we don't as yet have the basic funding released. Rather than wait for that to be available, we are prioritising our own funds to start that co-production so that we can bring a trial of the service forward, and that will be crucial to address the needs of service users. So that co-production will also give residents a chance to try hospital vehicles and get a clear idea of what that might offer to the range of measures that we're putting forward. As you've heard, delivery of drop curbs is quite a technical challenge. I don't think I need to repeat that. Absolutely appreciate that these smaller interventions won't address all of the concerns raised by speakers regarding the situation with our streets and pavements. However, we are also exploring options of delivering larger scale improvements through such mechanisms as the levelling up, and which we've discussed previously, and those would look for longer term major improvements within the city centre. Proposed local guidance on operation of pavement cafes will be vital to address access issues, which we know are really important. Cafe licenses have clearly been important, as you've heard from the local businesses, and in the longer term ambitions to support cafe culture in the city, we do need to address that as well as the accessibility concerns. I'd like to thank the public speakers who've taken the time to contribute to our consideration of these issues, and as I think you can understand, they are significant for us to try and find a way forward. So I would hope that once we have that greater clarity from the work we're proposing, we'll be able to see how new local pavement cafe license guidance operates, and then be able to judge more permanent arrangements that will take us forward in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. One of the benefits of cable TV is that you're able to watch reruns of debates in the House of Lords. And there have been some recently on pavement cafe licenses, arrangements and accessibility. There were very sage comments, but in terms of reaching a conclusion, I think, James, you've already alluded to there being a number of moving parts in the legislative framework and government guidance. It's just understanding for us tonight how that recent debate, the level of debate is being recognised nationally, because we're not the only council to be in this position, having to make decisions.
Yes, I mean, the debate in the House of Lords about extending the temporary legislation spent quite a bit of time talking about access. The sort of debate committed the government to update the guidance on access issues, and they've committed to update that guidance, but they haven't added anything to it yet on the access implications. The guidance is currently written on the context of a street that has cars going down it. It's not written in the context of a pedestrianised street, so it's not all that helpful. I think that guidance, and this is me in conjecture now, but that guidance will obviously emerge at some point, but on the back of that, there is still the permanent legal situation as set out in the Levelling Up Bill, which I think will also get plenty of debate, probably both in the Commons at committee stage, but when it gets to the House of Lords, about exactly the same issues of access and how they are controlled. As I alluded to in my response earlier, we are not alone in this. The picture in Annex C, I think it is, of the wheelchair using the ramp actually comes from a case in Westminster, where Westminster Council have worked with disability advocacy groups to come up with a solution, and that is one of the solutions they've come up with. So those same challenges are being experienced in cities across the country.
Chair, if I can just come back on that point. One of the issues that was brought up last Christmas season was the rigidity of these temporary structures, and the yellow ones were, so they were bowing, which wasn't helping. These new ones would be better than that.
So the ramps proposed are yes, they are different to that. Part of the reason we want to consult is to make sure we get that right, and that's why we think consultation is important. The ones you talk about, I think, were the ones around the temporary HVM measures, and yes, absolutely, we've taken lessons from that, and we will be installing as much as we can to make that access as smooth as possible.
Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. There was some reference from public speakers regarding pavement cafes that can impair access. Could you explain how such complaints are being handled? And can you say if any licenses have been removed? And also, as far as you can, taking into account that individual, we shouldn't be really talking about individuals, but there was a speaker about said from Goodrum Gate who raised some questions. I don't know whether you're able to make any reference to any of those issues he was referring to.
Sorry, yes. So I think, first of all, if you start at the beginning of the cafe license process, there is the legislation prescribes, the temporary legislation prescribes the application and advertising process. And that is to put a notice in your window for 7 days. And if you've got any issues, to raise those with the council. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, the public comments are generally very low at that stage of the process. When we do get complaints once the pavement cafe is in place, we do investigate those, and especially where those relate to access, and we try to find solutions as much as possible. But as you heard tonight, sometimes the impacts are such that our current arrangements and our current guidance means we don't have a workable solution we can instantly propose. The report and the table that's set out in paragraph 41 would give us solutions that would allow us to work with that property owner on Goodwin to try and find solutions there. I'm not saying it would definitely work, but it gives us more tools in the box, I think is what I'm getting at.
But you would encourage people to report if they see
yeah.
access issues particularly.
Thank you very much. A question from me, James, twofold, which is that I understand a separate report on HVM measures is due to come back to us. So just if you could confirm that. You referred to the police and security advice. I think we would benefit from inviting the superintendent to come to that meeting on that issue, if that invite could be issued, please.
Yes. The original intention was that the update following the procurement of HVM measures would be brought to this meeting alongside this report. Unfortunately, the contractors asked for more time in the procurement process. So in giving them that time, we've missed this deadline. We did consider not allowing them that time, but that put a greater risk in play that actually we wouldn't have any bids to the procurement process and we'd go back to square one. So upon advice, we extended that, and that it's hoped will come to a future executive. And I can absolutely extend your invite to the police and counter-terrorism services to come and attend that meeting.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us that start on page 27. The recommendations are as amended in those two places and outlined earlier by Janie. So I'd just like to see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. So thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting those amended recommendations. Thank you. At this stage in the meeting, because we've got a number of agenda items left, I'm going to take a short break. So my suggestion is that we come back at 7:10, which hopefully will give colleagues a couple of minutes to have a quick break. Apologies to those that are waiting, and we'll then start again. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Council Executive. This now means we're moving on to agenda item 7, Hackney Carriage licences, which starts on page 63 on the published pack. I'm going to go to James first to introduce colleagues. Thank you.
Just very quickly then, the Licensing and Regulatory Committee recommended increasing the number of Hackney Carriage licences by 3.8% to meet the unmet demand, and that will be considered by full council. The committee also made a recommendation about specifying the type of vehicle, and I'll hand over to Matt to take you through that report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've brought with me David Cowley, who's the new taxi licensing manager, just to answer any of the really tricky questions that you might have. So this is his first executives, so looking forward to it. I know. Yeah, as just been outlined, the licensing committee have recommended the increase in licenses to meet the significant unmet demand. However, the important bit for tonight is that they also recommended the type of vehicle that these vehicles should be issued to, and they recommended that they be black, wheelchair accessible, and either fully electric or electric plug-in London taxis. And the reason why that's important is because our policy says that you, the executive, will approve the type of vehicle that any new licenses will be issued to, should council in due course agree to increase the number of licenses as recommended by the committee. I'm not going to go into great detail about the report, but in summary, the licensing committee recommended that the vehicles be black to help make them more identifiable. This is when people are flagging down taxis because they can be flagged down, Hackney carriages, and to ensure that people don't get into an unlicensed vehicle by mistake, or to help make it less likely that they'll get into an unlicensed vehicle by mistake. Wheelchair accessible to make more vehicles available to passengers with a disability, and in the unmet demand survey it was identified that there was a shortage of such vehicles. And electric or electric plug-in to be better for the local environment. Finally, it is worth noting, or I need to note, that it is a significant investment into this type of vehicle. However, there are 2 of these vehicles in the fleet at the moment, which would suggest that they are viable. And we have a waiting list for carriage licenses, and there's 157 people on it. So quite a few people have expressed an interest in having a Hackney carriage license. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the executive meeting. I'll go to Councillor de Gaunt first.
Well, certainly this is a very welcome report, and as you've indicated, the unmet demand identified the need to increase the numbers that we have available, and the recommendations, as you've described, will help with our air quality standards, and they will also help with increasing the percentage of wheelchair accessible Hackney carriages available. So I very much support this. I think it might be useful, you may well have picked up from the representations, there have been some concerns raised about the timing of the survey and the impact that it has on current license holders, but I don't know if you want to, we obviously did take that into account when there was a discussion with a licensing committee, but never has been still further representation since then.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that was a point that was debated at length during licensing committee. Essentially, the unmet demand surveys should be carried out every 3 years. And the last survey was due in 2020, but of course COVID struck, and the situation was nothing like normality, should we put it that way. So licensing committee asked us to postpone the unmet demand survey until 2021. But of course, 2021 was also, or there was also a number of lockdowns in 2021. Anyway, an opportunity arose late in 2021, around October time, when we were in, if you recall, tier 4, as it was called then, in the lockdown restrictions, and there weren't that many restrictions in place at that time. You had to isolate if you had symptoms, and it was a good time, the first real opportunity to run the survey, which we were required to do. So we did that at that time. One of the things the survey picked up that's in the report is that part of the shortage is due to a lack of drivers as well, because a lot of drivers have simply not come back to taxiing after the pandemic, or have found a different career. So we've done a number of things to try and increase the number of drivers, and we have got more drivers coming back through the system now. But crucially, I guess, for tonight, the issue is about the type of vehicles that will be licensed if the executive agreed to that increase in number. I think it's fair to say that the increasing number was the biggest debate at licensing committee. This was, I think it's fair to say, less contentious. I think it was unanimous, if I remember rightly. So it is that point that I think you need to focus on this evening.
Thank you. Councillor de Gorn, do you want to go back? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. It's a quick question. One of the speakers also mentioned the actual space for Hackney carriages to pull up on a rank, and I think we all know Duncombe Place is a bit of a disaster area at the moment. I just wondered if you could tell us about enforcement. It appears that still isn't working really there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that is something, you know, at times of the day there quite clearly are vehicles parked on that rank. We have more enforcement officers now, and indeed today David would tell you that we've just begun discussions about how we get them authorised to be able to issue tickets for parking on that rank. So our taxi or our licensing enforcement officers, as well as the parking enforcement officers, will be able to carry out the same function and be able to enforce on that rank. So that's particularly helpful. But of course, the unmet demand is saying that there is an unmet demand for taxis, and that finding was therefore that there weren't enough taxis on the rank.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on page 63. Could I please see those who are happy to accept that? So that's clear consensus in favour of accepting that recommendation. So thank you very much. That then moves us on to agenda item 8 today, which is additional licensing in York, the consultation results and decision on designation, and this starts on page 185 in the pack, and Michael and Ruth are both joining us. So I'll go to Michael first. Thank you. So I've just been reminded that I did agree that Janie was just going to give a clarification, and then we'll go to Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to make clarification as regards one of the proposed recommendations, particularly recommendation 3, which appears on page 187. My proposal is that the reference to brackets as attached at appendix 3 close brackets is removed from recommendation 3 as is printed, and I would like to suggest an additional recommendation for executive to consider, which is recommendation 3A at the moment for this purpose, that upon signature of the designation, the council will give public notice in accordance with the designation brackets, a current draft of which of that notice is attached at Appendix 3. So Appendix 3 is actually the proposed public notice in draft form at this moment in time. It is not, as per the printed recommendation 3, the formal designation which executive are invited to consider for the corporate director of place to sign. So I just wanted to make that clarification clear. I have discussed this with my colleagues here this evening, and they have indicated to me that they are content with that proposed amendment to their report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Michael.
Thank you. So I'm going to give a bit of an introduction, set the context, and Ruth is here for any more detailed technical questions about how the licensing might operate and anything about the consultation responses. So on averages, homes in the private rented sector contain the poorest standards of any other housing tenure in the city. This sector provides homes for thousands of families and individuals sharing a house in York. In recent years, the authority have been operating a licensing scheme for houses in multiple occupation where there are 5 or more residents. During this time, our licensing programme has identified and ensured the resolution of hundreds of issues, improving standards across the city. At present, HMOs of less than 5 residents do not require a licence, and therefore standards are not controlled in this same way. Both the council plan and our housing strategy seek to ensure that people have a decent home to live in. The documents state that this will be in part achieved through a consideration of additional licensing. As such, Executive considered a previous report in March 2021 setting out a case for undertaking a consultation with city stakeholders regarding the introduction of additional licensing in the city. The consultation has taken place and it sought views on a proposed licensing scheme for HMOs with 3 or 4 occupants within 8 named wards. The 8 wards were selected because they contain large numbers of HMOs, they have large numbers of older housing stock, and because under the existing licensing regime, homes within these 8 wards have the greatest number of Category 1 and Category 2 health hazards. Whilst a range of views were included in the 1,032 consultation responses received as part of the 2 rounds of consultation, it is clear that there is broad support for the proposed additional licensing programme. A number of responses raised specific concerns regarding the existing standards of housing in this sector, adding to our evidence base. Full analysis of the results are contained within the report and annexes, and it is considered that the evidence presented is sufficient to pass the tests of the Housing Act in implementing additional licensing. As such, a series of recommendations are included within the report supporting the implementation of additional licensing, with this coming into effect in April 2023. The aim of the licensing regime will be to improve both physical and management standards, as well as ensuring that each landlord or manager passes a fit and proper person test. Annexes to the report outline the licensing fee schedule and the policy under which licenses will be considered. The report considers other alternatives for improving standards in this sector, such as voluntary accreditation, as discussed by the Landlords Association. However, we have concluded in the report that we believe that additional licensing is the most effective way to improve standards for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ruth, anything you want to add at this stage?
No.
Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to welcome the fact that we've now got to this point of being, I hope, about to improve the extension of HMO licensing to all HMOs in the 8 target wards, which, as the paper says, means that most houses in multiple occupation in the city. This is a really important step forwards in improving the standards of accommodation and the management of properties in the private rented sector in York. I would like to acknowledge the tremendous amount of hard work that Ruth and her team have put into getting us to this point. And that's evidenced by the sheer weight of supporting documentation that quite rightly supports this decision. This is something that we really need in York. failure to meet health and safety standards, inadequate room sizes, lack of natural light, failure to provide appropriate kitchens, bathroom or toilet facilities for the number of occupants, failure to provide appropriate heating or to meet minimum energy efficiency standards, and failure to meet the training requirements for licence holders are all mentioned in here as having happened in York, and all unacceptable situations for our private rented centre stock. The papers demonstrate there are also situations that have already been greatly improved, as Michael mentioned, by the implementation of the statutory licensing of HMOs with 5 or more occupants. And that illustrates how this level of success can now be achieved for most of the rest of our HMOs with 3 or 4 occupants. These papers provide strong and robust evidence of the need for the extension of HMO licensing, demonstrating that voluntary schemes have been tried in the past and not worked. Licensing will not only significantly improve conditions for tenants, but will also improve the management of properties and reduce their impact on nearby residents with respect to issues such as waste management and antisocial behaviour, whilst also offering training and support to landlords, encouraging good landlords and raising standards across the board. Finally, I'd just also particularly like to welcome recommendation 6 to establish a stakeholder group to help drive up standards across the private rented sector beyond HMOs. This group will both help to embed the new licensing regime in a collaborative manner, and is also the right next step with regards to looking at standards in the private rented sector as a whole. And I was glad to hear, as I think I understood, the speaker from the Residential Landlords Association welcoming that proposal. Thank you. So support the proposals.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would really like to thank the officers for all the work that's been done on this. And I know it's been a long time in the coming. And as Councillor Pavlovic said, in 2017, the motion was passed through full council. It was a Labour motion at that time, and we still hold this very dear. We think it's tremendously important. And I know I've been mentioning this an awful lot lately, but I think that raising standards in the private rented sector is tremendously important. We have our understanding of health inequalities in our city, and housing condition is a big factor in that. And we need to keep pushing for improvements there. Housing standards are very important. Another area that I think we should also be looking at is the role of rental agents in driving up our private rent standards in our private rented sector as well. I understand that the HUG scheme that we had recently to encourage landlords to help their tenants to improve the standards in their house around insulation and environmental measures was not well taken up. And I spoke to a couple of rental agents, and I understand that they weren't promoting it to their landlords. So that wasn't a standard across the city. And I think we likely can do more around that to make sure that they understand their role in that too. So we will be supporting this. And I think, as Councillor Pavlovic said, unfortunately, the York Residential Landlords Association obviously not in agreement with this response, but we need to push ahead with it. So we're fully in support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments you'd like to come back on? If not, we've got the recommendations in front of us. Let's start on page 186. If I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations as amended and outlined at the start. So thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations as amended. Thank you very much. That then takes us through onto agenda item 9, which is housing asset management and planned investment at Glen Lodge and Bell Farm, which starts at page 401. And I'm handing back now to Michael and to Sophie, but to Michael.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to do the same again, set the context. Sophie's done lots of the hard work on putting the report together and working through the detail, so Sophie will be well placed to answer any questions. So this paper seeks support to continue the development of plans for major refurbishment of 32 apartments within the original building at Glen Lodge and 40 apartments within the Bell Farm estate. The works proposed will resolve existing health and safety issues within the buildings and ensure that the properties provide good quality accommodation in the long term. Along with resolving health and safety concerns, the work will include retrofit works at the Bell Farm properties to significantly improve their thermal performance, both reducing carbon emissions and the fuel bills for residents. We hope that this work will be supported by central government grant funding, which we'll be submitting an application for in the autumn. Given the known issues at these apartments, the vacant homes have not been re-let. So of the 72 apartments proposed to be improved through these works, 40 are already empty, resulting in lost rental income as well as a reduced capacity to provide homes for those on our housing waiting list. The work to both Bell Farm and Glen Lodge are extensive and will require all remaining residents to move from their homes during construction works. We appreciate that this will be an unsettling time for residents, and the paper outlines an approach to providing holistic support to residents to ensure we meet their individual needs. This paper seeks to start the process of moving the remaining residents from their homes into alternative suitable accommodation over the coming months before construction work commences in spring/summer next year. By identifying the need to move early in the process, we will be able to work with residents and their families to ensure they find alternative accommodation that meets their needs. All residents will be offered the option of a temporary or a permanent move, so any resident will have the option to return back to their current home should they wish. Residents in Glen Lodge will be moving to the new wing in order to minimise the level of disruption for these older residents. Just as a quick update, since the paper was published, we have held engagement events with residents and family members from both Glen Lodge and Bell Farm. At the event, we explain the process for finding alternative accommodation and the support we will offer to ensure their needs are met. The residents of both Glen Lodge and Bell Farm who attended the events expressed their support for the proposals. If Executive approve the recommendations contained within this report, the next steps will be to focus on one-to-one meetings with the residents to support them into new accommodation, taking account of their wider needs. We will also begin procuring design teams through the utilisation of existing HRA budgets. Once the design and planning work for both projects is complete, we will tender for building contractors before bringing back a full business case, including the required budget allocation before Executive for consideration. Alongside this project work, we are developing an asset management plan to create a clear framework for identifying and resolving any future housing asset issues as part of our annual capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. It's really important that as a council landlord with more than 7,000 properties, we continually do as much as we can to update and upgrade the fabric of our properties and ensure that they meet appropriate standards of safety and comfort for our residents. This is a good example of us doing just that. Both the original part of Glen Lodge and the properties at Bell Farm are very much in need of this refurbishment. Residents are very aware that this work has been in the pipeline for some time now. Whilst having to move out is always a significant undertaking, I believe most residents are also very aware of the potential benefits once all the work is done. It's important to emphasise, and I'm sort of repeating a bit what Michael's just said, but it's probably worth repeating in a way, that residents will have the choice whether to move out temporarily with the intention to return or to move to a new permanent home. Those who do choose to return will be returning in effect to the equivalent of a new home with far better facilities, lower energy costs and improved thermal comfort. So hopefully, as with all home improvements, it will be well worth the disturbance. Of course, some of the residents in these properties are elderly and or vulnerable, so the whole process allows a lot of time between now and the likely start of work next spring or summer to provide advice and support and work with residents and their families and work out the best individual support plans. And just finally, the incorporation of energy efficiency retrofit works into planned refurbishment work like this and home improvement works is an important element of our approach to retrofit in our council stock. And this is an excellent example of how this can work and also reduce energy bills for residents. So I very much welcome the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, as leader of the Labour Group and also as the councillor for Heworth, I absolutely welcome this. And I attended both of the resident engagement events that happened last week and with Sophie's team, and would really like to thank them for doing that. I know it was really appreciated, and the residents are very much looking forward to the work being done. But unfortunately, I do have to say that I first went to a meeting about the potential for this work in 2017 at Bell Farm, and that work is well overdue. Damp in some of those flats is up to head height at 50% saturation in the wall. If that gives you an indication of the impact on the health of those vulnerable residents. So they absolutely need this. So please do not come and tell me that it's been delayed in any way. I just absolutely think people need that work done as quickly as possible. And the other aspect of that, and Councillor Craghill won't be surprised about me raising this, we know about the health inequalities that housing condition causes, and Bell Farm is one of the most affected areas in our city. And I have been recently told that the standing water, damp, tenant's choice has all been stopped, delayed or paused, whichever word you want to use, but that is really, really detrimental to that community. There are properties on that estate that have been waiting 9 years for this work and it still hasn't been done. And the impact of the COVID pandemic on their health, chronic health issues in that community is extensive. If you want to see the impact of that, the kind of ongoing chronic problems with health and how that has deteriorated in a community, with deprivation and disadvantage of that level, then I would really advise you to go and visit that community. So they need as much work as they can get done. And so I want to see all of those programmes kick-started again in that community. If we really are caring for the tenants in our council-owned properties, that's the place that it needs attention.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you in a second, Councillor Craghill. I was going to, whether Michael or Sophie want to outline some of the work that is actually planned and the completion of that work, and then I'll bring Councillor Craghill in.
In respect of the standing water and the tenant's choice queries.
About the report in front of us.
Oh, in terms of the reports in Bell Farm and Glen Lodge. Do you want to talk in a bit of detail about the actual works involved?
Yeah, so the work involved is as set out in the report. The time frame for that is that we will start our design work. So we'll be working with consultants. So for Bell Farm, we'll be working with an architect to look at what's required there in terms of replacing those pods and looking at the retrofit work that's needed. We anticipate that'll take us to end of this year, early next year, before we tender for a contractor, so with a start on site in summer, and that's the aspiration of the report. And for Glen Lodge, a mechanical engineer will start working on that, providing we get approval, and that work to start hopefully in spring. So that's the timescales that we're working to.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so this started out as in terms of Bell Farm, as a project to replace the pods on the back which contain asbestos. But as Councillor Douglas rightly raises, the properties within Bell Farm Avenue and Middleham Avenue have a whole host of issues. So we're not just tackling one aspect in isolation, we're in effect refurbing the properties from top to bottom and tackling all of the issues that we've identified.
Thank you. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the, I know it's not in this paper, but Councillor Douglas raised, and it's kind of connection in terms of the area in Hewith perhaps, raised the issue of the standing water properties. And I just want to say briefly and then go back to Michael, who could perhaps add a bit more. The standing water programme has not been stopped, certainly not across the city. 20 properties have been completed this year so far. Another 7 are planned to be worked on. That leaves us with about 50 to do, and we have a plan to hopefully complete those, or very close to completing those, over the next financial year. But Michael can perhaps add something perhaps specifically about Hewith. I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah, so those standing water issues are not just in Hewith, they're across the city. We've identified about 50 properties that need significant works. We're working closely with the residents who are not getting the work undertaken this year, to make sure that we are supporting them, making sure the house is still healthy to live in, cleaning down any damp issues. And if residents need to move out of those properties because they are unhealthy, then we can support that pending the standing water works that will continue over the next 18 months until we've completed all of those 50 properties.
Thank you. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. I know the new part of Glen Lodge well. I was there and the topping out. Pleased to talk to some of the apprentices who are actually building it. I'm pleased to visit afterwards to see the high standard of work inside. And if we can achieve those high standards elsewhere, I shall be delighted. But I want to check, Michael, that you're using the moving home safely protocol. That's really important for residents. As you have already said, it's quite a disruption when you have to move out and then possibly move back again. And can you just assure me that that's the case?
I can, and I'll hand over to Sophie to talk in a little bit more detail about what our proposals are for supporting people to move safely.
Yeah, so the moving home safely protocol was a national protocol for the closing of care homes. So although we can't use that terminology specifically, we're very aware of that protocol itself. So we're engaged with Adult Social Care and PSS, who provide the care for Glen Lodge, and they were present at the consultation events that we held last week, just to assure residents that they will be supported in a very consistent way, and that their care will follow them where they need to go. And also just making sure that residents receive a thorough support package when they move, so that they shouldn't be inconvenienced, more than absolutely necessary by this move. So all the practicalities around moving will be accounted for and have been accounted for in that draft budget as well.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 9. Could I please see those that are in favour of accepting those recommendations? So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That then takes us to agenda item 10, which is inspection of local authorities, children's services and action plan. This starts on page 435 in our pack, and I'll hand over to Joanna to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hopefully, as I go through the report, some of the questions raised by Councillor Webb, one of the speakers this evening, will be answered as well as I go through it. So,
sorry to interrupt. Can you move your microphone a little closer? That would be fun. Even closer, I think. And then it will go straight on your notes. But thank you very much.
Can you hear me now?
Not very clearly.
Can you hear me now?
I wonder whether it's the actual microphone. Or it might just be us in the room. That sounds better.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I never have this problem when I'm talking to my children. They always say I need to use my indoor voice, so it's good. It's good of having the problems here, so I can go back and tell them. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully, some of the as I go through the report, as I said, some of the questions raised by Councillor Webb, speaker earlier this evening, will be answered around recruitment and turnover. So I'm just going to go through the report, and as people are aware, we were inspected in November 2016. This was under a single inspection framework, what's called a SIF. Following that, we had a joint targeted area inspection in 2018 and a focus visit in 2019. And I think following the focus visit, an improvement board was set up and established to make sure that we brought in the changes that were still required through those 2 visits. Just wanted to highlight that we were inspecting in March 2022, but this was under a different inspection regime. It was inspection of the local authority children's services, which is now called the ILACS. Quite different to the single assessment framework, as it's quite targeted on the experience and outcomes of children based on their judgments and their views. And also frontline workers and social workers, it's less focused on processes and partnership working, where the SIF was a much wider inspection. So this inspection really focused on the effectiveness of the local authority and its arrangements in place to make sure that our children are safe, and also that we progress care wherever the child or young person may be, whether they're in a children's home setting or they're returning to home or are placed with parents. And they also looked at the experience of our care leavers and how they felt of the support they were given whilst leaving care. In addition to that, I think a new inspection, part of the inspection was effectiveness of leaders and how leaders are managing change and the managers feel about the leaders' oversight of this. So those were the specific changes in ILACS, and it was brought in 2019, and obviously with COVID it was tested out in 2022 with lots of local authorities going through the same inspection regime. So as I said, a lot of people are aware that the inspection report was published in May 2022, and one of the 3 areas all required improvement to be good, and those were the impact on leaders and social practice, the experience and progress of children who need help, and the experience and the progress of children in care and care leavers. I do have to point out that the grading that we had was requires improvement to be good. So that's where the inspectors who have looked at children's services and what we're doing as a council are saying that we're not yet good. However, what has been done is of an acceptable standard, and the standard of care and support that we are providing is acceptable. And also they found that there was no significant safeguarding issues, so no child they deemed was unsafe who were known by our services, and just really wanted to highlight that specific grade. The report identifies that senior leaders and elected members are well informed, so it wasn't that there was no evidence that we had senior leaders and elected members that weren't well cited on the improvements that needed to be made and didn't have an oversight there. The Ofsted recognised that this was being done, the improvement board was improving services, but I think what they actually highlighted that some of the pace could have been improved, whilst the majority of services were showing improvement. It still needed to be embedded, but there was no indication of lack of senior leadership or lack of senior oversight on those changes that were being made. A lot of the progress actually is reported through our children education and community policy and scrutiny committees, so the oversight of some of the changes were actually moved through that committee and scrutinised by that committee. The report also identified that we had COVID, and during COVID-19, where lots of services had struggled, the inspector said there was clear strengths within children's social care, reported by our social workers about the support they had received by senior managers and the council to help them carry on providing the service. Vast amounts of our improvement actually was done through COVID. So as I go through the report, although it was an unprecedented challenging time, we still had motivated social workers and teams that helped us to improve services. So during January 2022, we invested an additional 300,000 in our social workers. That took our social work full-time equivalents from 67 to 85. So that's an improvement of 18 full-time social workers since our SIF inspection in 2016. We also launched and developed a multi-agency safeguarding hub, and this was really praised by Ofsted about the partners working together at early stages of highlighting any safeguarding risks, but also supporting children to remain in their families whilst we did some of those assessments, and really setting those thresholds about how we can ensure that those children who require support get the right support, and those children who require a significant safeguarding intervention got it at the right time. And that was really praised within our Ofsted inspection. What was also praised is, I think we're one of the areas that have got specific targeted family support. This is where we support families, what we call children at risk of being taken into care. So we call it edge of care. This support has really helped a number of families, 78 in total since it came in, and has supported families where young people are at risk of coming into care, and how can we support parents to maintain the right parental support. And that has actually increased. We have seen an increased referrals into our target support. People might think that might be a negative thing. However, it's not. Where more children are coming through targeted support, it shows that there's a reduction in the number of children who could have been in care instead of going through that service. We've also developed and launched a dedicated exploitation team. In the region, we're one of the few councils who have a dedicated team supporting children around criminal and sexual exploitation. And we work very closely with the police on that. And we are, like I say, one of the areas that have got a dedicated team for that. It's not part of any other or an add-on to any other team. And through this, through our workforce strategy, and I think one of our speakers made a real good comments around workforce and what we're doing with our workforce, because none of this can be done without a stability. We did have a startup that we called a frontline programme with the University of York and Step Up to Social Work as well. So two programmes started at the same time. I am pleased to say that 19 people have gone through the frontline programme. All have now qualified and all are staying within social work. And additional, we've recruited 10 social workers who are starting in September. 5 of those have been through the local university at York and decided to stay in York. So that's another positive outcome for York. So the stability of our social work is getting much better, as we've got 19 social workers, an additional 10, reducing our agency staff. And when we talk about agency staff, I really do want to put it into context around the agency staff we have. By September, the agency staff should be reduced to 18. But however, we'd just like to say that the staff we have are more than 6 months. We don't have a turnover in agency staff on month like you may find in some other areas. The length of the agency social workers around 6 months to a year, and usually we have that turnover of agency is when we have more permanent staff joining. I would also like to highlight at this point that it's not so much that York has a high turnover of staff, it's around the recruitment, and we know that there's a national shortage of social workers and recruitment is an issue everywhere, but I will talk about later what we've done about recruitment. And then there's a further development. So we further developed our performance data and quality management information. This has helped our senior leaders, so our executive members, as well as our chief officer, to really interrogate the data and look at what the quality of care that is being delivered. And that was equally recognised by Ofsted as being a really good indicator to our leaders. They also recognise that that the pandemic has caused some challenges. It has caused challenges in the way that we've had working with our colleagues, so our partners, particularly health, where some services were stepped down to support the COVID pandemic, which was quite right. However, this did affect some of our working. And when we look back at the JTI, which is the Joint Targeted Area Inspection, a lot of that work was predicated on us working with partners, but that work has started in earnest and delivering some really good results. The Ofsted team highlighted, I'm just going to go through some strengths before I go into the weaknesses. Yeah, so some of the strengths were around children in care and the virtual school. The virtual school and supporting children in education was quite good. They also highlighted that we're our safeguarding. So we had no children, as I mentioned, that were at risk, because strategy meetings and joint strategy meetings were quite good. And they also highlighted our adopted carers, and I think I haven't mentioned around adopted carers and assessment for adopted carers. Those assessments are done in a timely way. However, the report does bring out some areas of requires improvement. The 7 areas that require improvement, which are listed in the action plan. And quite clearly, one of them is around the consistency and of written records, and the other one is around quality. And some of the information I give you about the stability of the workforce will answer some of the questions around the consistency. But we have made some key strides in this. We appointed a new director of Children's Services who is starting on the 15th of August, and also a director of safeguarding starting on the 1st of August. And in point B, it says recruitment is underway. We have now interviewed and recruited 2 of those heads of service. So that's also been done. And particularly looking at the action plan, as you can see from the action plan, a lot of those actions, especially the first 3 actions, have already been done. And this is due to a lot of the pace of change that has been happening over the last few years has now come into fruition, and lots of those actions that Ofsted have raised have now been completed. There's still work to do, but we are on that journey. I'm not going to go through the action plan because that's for people to read, but the action plan will be sent to Ofsted on the 10th of August. This has been done collectively with our children, young people, our partners, has been through the Safeguarding Children's Board, as well as our Youth Justice. So I'm just going to stop there. I thought hopefully that's a comprehensive review of the report. Sorry, I've gone a bit over.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome the amount of work that's gone into developing the initial draft action plan, and as Jamila mentioned, that has been through partnership groups, it's been through scrutiny, it's come tonight to executive. There's been sessions with young people who have experience of care service, and their lived experience has been very much included in the action plan, because the voice of young people, I'm delighted that full council voted through the amendment to include young people in the corporate parenting board, and I think that's a very positive demonstration. And thank you to the members who attended the corporate parenting training yesterday. That will be offered online to those who weren't able to make that. So I think what's been very strong in the response is identifying those areas of strength that were identified by Ofsted, and those areas that we do need to focus on. A timetable which hasn't received many adjustments. It was a very strong. There was a challenge on the timetable to make sure that it demonstrated the pace and also recognised the work that was already in progress that has taken some time to develop. So I think that there is a very strong response which will be put back to Ofsted, and they are acquainted with what's in this. So I think that's something, a strength for the approach going forward. So I hope that members will endorse this response so we can get it in time to Ofsted.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. have to say, I don't feel quite as upbeat and optimistic about this. I'm sorry, optimistic isn't the right word. I am optimistic that we can change it around, and we absolutely have to. But I feel quite a level of disappointment that I have concern as well, that is the severity of this situation really acknowledged. It's a very optimistic outlook. It's very rosy picture of we had a requires improvement assessment by Ofsted, and that is not good for our city and nor for the children, families that are functioning within our care system or within social services around that. And I think and I have been told by experts in the field that in order to come out of this cycle, which has been a cycle since 2016, we really need what some people call a bomb put under it in order to really shake it up and make the progress that we need to. And I have concern that members around the table perhaps aren't looking at things on that level of importance. The money that has been put into the department, the 4.7 million, as Councillor Webb pointed out, has allowed us to stand still. It doesn't support improvements, and we do need improvements. And I have grave concern. I would like to be proved wrong, and please do that. But at this point in time, I'm still not sure the severity of the situation has really been taken into account.
Thank you. Ian's going to come in.
Yeah, I think just a few points. I think just to recognise, I think the report does contain lots of areas of really good practice. It's in the detail of it. Clearly, there requires improvement. We'd all like that rating to be higher, and the commitment is absolutely there to make it higher. But just to recognise, there are lots and lots of areas of really good practice that report highlights. This is a tough inspection regime. There are many authorities who have received worse ratings than this. Just in terms of the investment and the plans, clearly we've just appointed 2 new chief officers who come with very good reputations, clearly from an authority which has a very high rating. The service will receive certainly lots of attention from myself. It has in the past, and I'm absolutely committed to do that in the future, as I know will elected members as well give it that attention. There clearly is a national sort of challenge in terms of finances around children's services. You don't need to go too far to find authorities which have got much more greater pressures and actually bigger challenges than actually we've got. There are lots of plans in place to actually take the service forward. Commitment. York should absolutely be good and excellent, and that's the commitment, and certainly that's what I want to achieve with the support of elected members, with the support of what I think will be excellent chief officers that we've appointed. I'd also recognise the work that Jamila has done actually in terms of moving that service forward in the last few months. And just in terms of what was said around the chief officer structure, just to be clear, going back to around 2020, we had 6 chief officers covering adults and children's services. That hasn't changed through either restructure. We still have 6 chief officers covering adults and children's services. And actually, we've taken some functions out of their responsibility. So we moved housing, for example, and we've also moved communities. So actually, you've still got 6 officers, and the cost of those officers and that structure is actually more than it was around about 2 years ago. So it hasn't delivered savings, that aspect. It's actually put investment in to those areas, and in part reflects the recruitment challenges we are facing. So actually, we have upgraded, recognising the market forces. That has allowed us, in my view, to bring in 2 very senior and experienced people who I am very confident will be able to take the service forward. And so no complacency, absolutely. And, you know, we will be committed to continue taking those improvements forward. And I'm sure the whole city will support that.
Thank you very much for that. So we've got the recommendation in front of us on page 435. If I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept that recommendation. So that's clear consensus in favour of accepting that. Thank you very much. So that then takes us on to agenda item 11, developing a 5-year dementia strategy for York, which starts on page 453 of your packs. And again, I'll go to Jemima to introduce this to us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we have included the draft dementia strategy along with the report tonight. It has had extensive consultation with people who use services, carers and providers, and been supported greatly by Healthwatch to make sure that we can catch the views of individuals as part of developing this strategy. It has taken a while to do this, and making sure that we collect all the views of everybody to have a strategy that is workable. As you can see from the strategy in forward, it is a working document. Although it's a 5-year strategy, we expect to review it on a 6 to 12 month basis, and it will then change and adapt as services change and adapt within dementia. I think the key bits to highlight to people, at the moment we have 2,812 people in York living with dementia. That's quite a high number, and we see this increasing to around just under 4,000 by 2030. So there is an expectation that there will be an increased number of people with dementia and those then needing services. But that's just an estimate that we've got. We know that in our diagnosis rates, we are lower than the national average. So I do see that number rising, hence why the strategy is so important, and the action plan that's attached with it is so important to bring in and then start working with individuals to develop our services correctly. The key foundations are work alongside the health and wellbeing strategy around preventing illness. So we support people to live well for longer, and that's ensuring that we have the right service there. That leads on to diagnosing well. The only way we can then start that early intervention and prevention is to make sure that people with dementia are diagnosed. We did get some pushback about whether diagnosing too many people are we pulling people into services, but actually what we've seen in all the clinical studies have shown, and some of the King Fund's recommendations are diagnoses people very early on in their journey helps individuals and their families to stay well for longer, and the support is available longer in the community. And that leads on to living well. We don't want people just to live longer if they do have a dementia diagnosis, but we want them to live well for longer, as well as their carers supporting them. And then dying well, this is a really important element that we put in, and lots of individuals talked about being supported to die in the place that they want to and have advanced directorates. Lots of those things are missing at the moment, and we see a number of older people dying in hospital, and this was raised by carers and people living with dementia around. That should be a significant part in the strategy, which is there now. And lots of people we're not quite sure whether we should mention that, but I think it's a key aspect of the aging and living process. So I don't really want to say too much more about this, because I brought the draft strategy to you a few months ago. We are hoping that this strategy will be made public in September. So it's almost a finished article. I think last time we were saying, okay, so you've done a strategy, so what does that mean? Alongside the strategy, we have developed a clear action plan, and that will be delivered through a steering group and updates brought to the executive as required.
Thank you very much. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to start by thanking Jamila and Abby for all their hard work on this strategy, and Sheila Fletcher from the Health Service, who's also contributed significantly. This is a great milestone in our work on the dementia strategy for the city. Making York a dementia-friendly city is a key aspiration for our administration, and since the council plan was agreed, work has been underway to achieve this alongside the development of the draft strategy. There's been significant engagement by the team with people who have a lived experience of dementia, including their carers and their families, and this has given us a better understanding of the current environment, what works well for them, what doesn't, and how they wish to see dementia support developed in the future. New approaches have been identified in current areas of practice, and one excellent example detailed in the report is the great work that's taken place with our partners to develop a dementia hub. And I was very pleased recently to visit one of the sites where that might come to fruition. The draft strategy follows the National Dementia Well pathway, and as you've heard Jamila say, it focuses on preventing well, living well, diagnosing well, supporting well, and dying well. It's already been considered by Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Health and Wellbeing Board, and it's been out to public consultation with a series of local events and surveys to assure as many views as possible are taken into account. More recently, an important event took place with people living with dementia. In one of those who attended the strategy, they thought it was good progress. I'm pleased that following this event, officers will undertake further work to provide more detail and clarity on the key priorities I've described, as this was identified by some of the people at that meeting. If colleagues agree to improve the strategy this evening, as I recommend they do, it's intended it will be published in September and an action plan will follow. We need to consider that by 2025, 1 million people will be living with dementia in the UK, as people live longer lives, with many others around them affected. However, we know that there are ways to make life easier and more enjoyable for all involved, and that's why it's so important we take this draft strategy forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Jamila for the report. It's really very heartening that this is finally coming through. I think the community of people affected by dementia and living with dementia have been waiting for this for some time. I do have a question for Councillor Runciman, though, around how this actually goes out into the community and is put into action and is usable by the community. At the moment, it reads a bit like a document that is made for professionals. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how that should be taken forward so that it's more usable for families that are find themselves having to work around this issue.
Thank you very much. I'll just bring Jamila in.
Oh,
and
yes.
then I'll bring Councillor Runciman after that, in case there's anything to add on that point.
Yeah, so this is a draft document. There will be an accessible version of this as well. That will be for the public and for individuals who would like more accessible versions of it.
Councillor Runciman.
Yes, we have been working with Health Watch on this, and that was difficult in the COVID lockdown. But certainly we shall involve Health Watch and make sure that the people that want the information and need the information have got it in a format that they can understand. It might have to be an easy read version. I don't know, but we shall find that out. But certainly accessible versions, and losing some of the formalities which might put people off understanding it.
Thank you very much. Douglas.
Yeah, sorry, just to come back, and I just wanted to highlight to the meeting as well. I'm sure Jamila and Councillor Runciman have seen this recent announcement this week about the impact of air quality on cognitive impairment. And I think, again, you know, looking at the health of our city, it's tremendously important that we take that into account when we're thinking about how many people in York may be significantly impacted by poor air quality, and we can likely reduce the number of people coming through with dementia diagnoses in the longer term by addressing that in our city.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The wider determinants of health affect all sorts of aspects of health, including air quality, and including all sorts of other things that we've been talking about tonight, like housing. What is important is that we help and support organisations like Dementia Forward, which support people before a diagnosis of dementia, when people perhaps aren't so sure that that is the actual problem. And I shall be working with those groups, as I have already, to make sure that whatever we can do to alleviate the things that affect dementia or may trigger dementia, according to the latest research, are ameliorated as much as possible.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 11. Could I please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations? So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting that. Thank you very much. That then moves us to agenda item 12, which is urgent business. I've not been told that we have any urgent business. So just to thank everybody from the public participants at the start, to the officers, to the councillors, to those watching for participating in now this evening's executive meeting. Thank you.